What is going on, everyone? This is Eric coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, and today we are going to look at the NHL standings roughly halfway through the season, and today is March 24th, 2021, and we're going to look at the standings once more, starting with the West this time. I know last time I went Northeast, Central, West. This time we're going to kind of change it up a little bit, start with the West. So, as always, you guys know how the standings work. So using Vegas as an example, 22 means 22 wins, 7 means 7 regulation losses, and the 1 means 1 overtime/shootout loss. And then you have their total points next to that. So to make this easier, I'm not going to go over their records. I'm just going to go by points. So we're going to start off, like I said, with the West. So Vegas is in first with 45 points. Colorado right behind them with 43. Minnesota with 39 points. St. Louis clinging on to the last playoff spot in the West with 37 points. Then you get a little bit of a drop with Arizona at 33, Los Angeles right behind them at 32, San Jose with 28, and lastly, Anaheim at 24. So Vegas has looked like the best team in the West. Vegas is definitely looking like they want to compete this year, and they definitely have the firepower to do it. Of course, Pacioretty's looking very good, and really, Vegas is just a very formidable team. They're not going to be easy to beat. They have one of the best, if not the best, goaltending duos in the NHL. So, of course, that's with Lehner and Fleury. Will they be able to continue to dominate? We'll have to see. This is the halfway point. The halfway point is not in any means the final, the regulation, the end of the season. Doesn't matter. It comes down to who's hot at the right time. Vegas, though, if the playoffs started today, they're in a good position. Colorado, speaking of goaltenders, Grubauer for Colorado has looked very good of late. Of course, they're right behind Vegas. And the difference between these two teams is Vegas has the depth scoring. Colorado has the top line of just absolute firepower. Of course, how are you going to really beat Landeskog, MacKinnon, and Rantanen? It's not easy to beat those guys. Grubauer, like I said, he's been on fire of late. And if he can continue to play well, Colorado is going to make it. Really, I think it's going to be a Colorado-Vegas Western semifinal, Western finals. Either way, whoever wins the West is going to have themselves a decent chance to do well. We'll have to see how things go. Minnesota is playing above where I thought they'd be, above where a lot of people thought they'd be. They're a good but not great team. Minnesota has been a little bit of a beneficiary of a weaker schedule to start the season. So, of course, you could have said that a while ago, and it'd still be true, but we'll have to see how they do in the stretch run. Minnesota is a good team. I just don't think they're great. We'll have to see. We will have to see. St. Louis has been struggling of late. Of course, Binnington hasn't looked that good. They did recently sign him to a contract extension like a week and a half ago. And they did recently get Vladimir Tarasenko back about 2.5, 3 weeks ago. So they're starting to kind of come together. St. Louis was a little colder earlier in the season. We'll have to see what they can do. Obviously, the hope is Tarasenko comes back with a passion. He's been kind of eased back into action. So, obviously he missed a long chunk of time with a couple different injuries. So, hopefully Tarasenko continues to contribute. They need him to play well in order for this team to, have a chance. But right now, Vegas and Colorado are clearly better. Arizona's been doing good. But Arizona still has a lot to prove before I can call them a contender. They're not really able to hang with the big guys in this division. Sorry, Arizona. You do have some key good young players, but we'll have to see. There's a lot that can change for Arizona. Los Angeles, speaking of good young players, this team has a good amount of them. They also have a decent amount of older veterans, though. So this team's got a good mix. This team could be a team that can pull a little bit of an upset run if they were to somehow make the playoffs as a 4 team in the West. We will have to see what happens, but I don't really conceivably see them as a playoff team. It's going to be very difficult for them to make the playoffs, obviously. Still, they have goaltending problems. They really have to look at Jonathan Quick and say, is he still the answer, or do we need to let him go? San Jose, embrace the rebuild. That's really all I got to say to you guys. You still have Timo Meier, yes, but you got to embrace the rebuild. Let Marleau retire in peace. Just let him go. Thank him for everything he did. Get Marleau back. Say thank you. Get Thornton back. Say thank you. That's it. Lastly, Anaheim. I don't even know what Anaheim's doing anymore. If you're one of two teams in the NHL that doesn't have 10 or more regulation wins, or wins in general, I don't know what you're doing. And Anaheim's one of those two teams. So they got a lot to figure out. It's just, at this point, they have to look at some of their players and say, do we need this guy? Jacob Silverberg, for example, do you really need him? I think you should trade him, get a couple prospects for him. You know, it's going to be tough. John Gibson's hurt right now, so you can't really trade him. But he's still young, so Anaheim, they got a lot to figure out. Now we'll look at the Central, and the Central has Tampa Bay, the defending champion Tampa Bay Lightning, sitting in first with 50 points, the best in the league. Carolina's right behind them at 45. Florida has 44, and then you have a steep drop-off going to Chicago with 35, Columbus with 33, Nashville with 31, Dallas, surprising, with only 28, and Detroit with 24. Tampa Bay has looked very good of late. Tampa Bay is one of those teams. They've been dominating on second ends of back-to-backs. I think they're 4-0-1, so they have 9 points on their 5 back ends of back-to-backs. That's impressive. A lot of teams have been struggling when they're given a back-to-back. You know, a game on Tuesday and then a game on Wednesday, hypothetically. We'll have to see if they can continue it. But Tampa Bay definitely looks like a team that can compete. And honestly, the only team in the Central that I think will challenge them is not Carolina. I think it's Florida. Now, Florida has also been very hot of late. And Florida is one of those teams that, you know, they're a bit of a punching line because of their fan base, or lack thereof. But they're definitely a good team. They have a lot of talented players. And I wouldn't want to go up against Florida right now. I really wouldn't. Florida's ready to play. And Ekblad is really looking like a Norris Trophy candidate. Do I think he'll win it? No. But he is looking like a candidate. So I skipped Carolina there. Carolina, they have some good players. Obviously, Aho's very good. The defense is kind of showing up, but the goaltending still isn't great to me. I look at that goaltending and I see a lot left to be desired. So I'm not sure. I'm not sold. And of course, Teravainen, what's going on with him? When is he going to come back? Which Teravainen are we going to see when he comes back? Is he still good? I mean, there's just so many questions with Teuvo Teravainen right now. I'm not sold. I'm sorry, Carolina. I think you guys are going to be the Cants rather than the Canes right now. Chicago, Chicago is a team that I didn't think would be a playoff team. Yet right now, if the playoffs started today at the halfway point, they would be a playoff team. This is a team I underrated. I'll admit that. I did underestimate Chicago. But I still don't think they're going to make a run. They're good, but they're not that good. They're playing a little bit over their heads. They had a couple of times where they just played really good games where they probably wouldn't have normally. They shouldn't have played as well as they did. So kudos, Chicago. But, I mean, the problem is you don't have the veteran leadership to really lead you in the long haul. Right now that helps you because you're getting some of those prospects and younger guys playing big roles. You know, that Taves and Seabrooks were, you know, they had last year. Now, obviously, Taves is hurt. Seabrook retired. So you got to give them to rookies or younger guys. That's fine right now. But in the stretch run, you're going to miss the veteran leadership. Columbus is a 500 team. They're playing like a 500 team. They're good, but not that good. The problem with Columbus is they can never seem to get a guy and keep him for much longer than, you know, his contract. They always seem to let them go, and that's just a little bit of a flag to me. So, I mean, there's a lot of problems, and Patrick Laine is definitely looking good, but other than Laine, you're hard-pressed to really think of a lot of players in that team. Nashville, there's not much good to say about Nashville right now. And honestly, Nashville's not even the biggest disappointment in this division. Nashville's playing about where I thought they would. Nashville has some talent, but the problem with Nashville is pretty simple. They just don't have the offense, firepower. They don't have the firepower to compete with the big boys like Tampa Bay, Carolina, and Florida. And yeah, it's weird to say Florida, but sorry, Nashville, your defense can only take you so far, and right now their defense isn't even amazing. Dallas has to be the biggest disappointment in the NHL this year up to this point. They dealt with a certain viral illness, I get that, but that was at the beginning of the season. Many teams that had to deal with that illness are now over it at this point in time. So you need to prove yourself. You need to get yourself back into shape. You guys you're showing that the Stanley Cup loss hangover is real. A lot of the times we see it, and it's well known in the NFL. If you make the Super Bowl and you lose, typically you have a massive hangover and you miss the playoffs the next year, or you just barely make the playoffs. Of course, the Patriots tend to buck that trend, but whatever. Regardless, we see it in the NHL too. A lot of the times you lose in the Stanley Cup final and you end up falling off a cliff the next year. Like, look at Boston, 2019. They make the Stanley Cup and lose in 7. And then the next year they're out in the first round of the playoffs. Well, second round of the playoffs. It wasn't a pretty series, though, for them. So Dallas very well might go from making the Stanley Cup and losing to just being out of the playoffs. We'll have to see. They still have some time to recover, and they're definitely within striking range of Chicago. Lastly, we have Detroit. Honestly, if you would have told me that you thought Detroit was a contender in January, I would have laughed at you, and you would have laughed as well, because it would be a joke. Detroit, you have some young players. Keep developing them. You got some good young defensive players. Keep it up. And please, don't ruin the career of Dylan Larkin. We don't need another Jack Eichel in this league. Next, we have the East. And the East is definitely one of the weirder divisions. So the Islanders sit in first place with 46 points. 2 points behind them is Washington. Then the Pittsburgh Penguins sit 4 points behind them at 40. Boston with 36. Philadelphia with 34. The Rangers within striking distance at 32. Then you get the Devils at 28. And lastly, the Buffalo Sabres with only 16 points. I know you can't see it, but I'm shaking my head at you, Buffalo. So the Islanders are another team I underrated. This team, obviously, they did recently lose Anders Lee for the season. He suffered an ACL injury. Fortunately, I don't think it was an ACL tear, but still very concerning if you're an Islanders fan. Something to watch out for. They probably will look to make a trade deadline acquisition. Probably someone who's not a great scorer, but is a good leader on the ice. Islanders, this is a team that plays strong defense. And they've continued to play strong defense, but the offense is starting to produce this year while the defense is slowly backing off. They're still playing a very strong defensive game where they pressure you and they keep you and they make you make plays that you shouldn't make. But the offense is there. And right now, that defense, the goaltending. Oh, man, Sorokin came over from Russia. This kid, I remember when the season started, I mentioned him. Some people probably said, who's Sorokin? Who are you talking about? He's making his name known. So, trust me, keep an eye on Sorokin. Washington, speaking of Russian stars, look at Ovechkin. Ovechkin's just continuing to set records. So, how long will the grade 8 last is my question. How much longer can he keep this pace up? Ovechkin's a very good player. Gotta love this guy. Obviously, you gotta hate him, but you gotta love him. It's a very interesting thing with Ovechkin. Now, this team, similar to Dallas, they did deal with a certain viral illness, but they didn't really suffer from it. And Tom Wilson's Tom Wilson. So, he had a suspension for I'm going to call the suspension suspect, more suspect than the hit. But, we'll have to see what happens with that. But right now, Washington is a team I don't want to play in the playoffs. Pittsburgh has shown some flaws. Pittsburgh's goaltending in particular is really kind of a suspect at best at times. Right now they're looking good, but we've seen it before where Pittsburgh's goaltending is atrocious. So it looks like the poor goaltending went across the Commonwealth of Philadelphia, but we'll have to see. Pittsburgh, I wouldn't necessarily bank on them making a run because their offense can only carry them so far. Boston, right behind them. Boston's currently dealing with a certain viral illness that's keeping a lot of their stars out, including David Pastrnak. So they are currently on hiatus for a few more days at least. We'll have to see with Boston how they can do when they return. Will they be able to produce, or will the NHL screw them over like they did Philadelphia and make them play multiple games, make them play something like 5 games in 7 days, 2 times over about a 3-week span? It's ridiculous. So we'll have to see what happens, what the NHL does with the scheduling, and how Boston adapts. That's the big thing. But Boston has been a slight disappointment this season. Not a massive disappointment, but they haven't played up to par. Pasternak's doing all he can, and this team's really showing up against the Flyers. But outside of Philadelphia, this team has had some troubles, including against the Devils. Next, we have the Flyers. And the Flyers, let me tell you right now, the Flyers' problems are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. One, they need to shoot the puck more. You can't win games if you shoot the puck, if you get, 20 shots on goal. You can't keep winning games. It's not sustainable. Two, they need to stop playing this horrible defensive game that they're playing. They let their defense, they have their defense too much. They overcommit on offense. They try to be pretty passing the puck. That's great if it works, but if it doesn't work, you're leaving too many 3-on-2 or 2-on-1 situations for your defense. And obviously you lost Niskanen this offseason to retirement. So now Justin Braun's your best defensive player. That's not exactly a great guy to have as your best defensive player. Provorov, again, I like him, but he's an offensive-minded defenseman before anyone says, oh, you forgot Provorov. So, yeah, and then 3, the goaltending needs to figure out what the heck it's doing. Carter Hart has looked atrocious recently. Brian Elliott has looked atrocious recently. I mean, I don't know what's going on with the Flyers goaltending. I don't know if Pittsburgh somehow said, here's our bad luck, take it for goaltending. But Philadelphia needs to fix it quickly. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves home come playoff time. The New York Rangers are a team that's been surprising a lot of people of late. They've been playing well against a lot of the good teams. Philadelphia, I would say beat them 9-0 not too long ago. Boston, I think they took 3 or 4 games against Boston. So that's a little surprising. And then they're currently 3-1 against the Capitals on the season. So they're playing good against the good teams. They just lose games to teams like Buffalo and the Devils for some reason. I don't know why. Obviously, the Rangers, they have talent. There's no denying that. The goaltending is young. The goaltending is talented. The offense is finally slowly starting to heat up. The real question is going to be, how long will it take for the offense to get up? And can they surpass Philadelphia and possibly Boston or Pittsburgh and make the playoffs? It's possible. I wouldn't bet on it. New Jersey is literally the Boston Bruins killer. They have something, I think they played 5 games and they've won 4 of them. I don't understand that. New Jersey's not that good of a team. Mackenzie Blackwood's playing very well, so I'll give him credit. But other than that, I mean, New Jersey's left a lot on the board, in my opinion. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But if I'm a Devils fan, I'm excited for the future. I just don't think the future is today. Lastly, Buffalo. I mean, I don't even want to say anything about Buffalo. Buffalo's just a trash can at this point. I have no idea what's going on. Anything they touch turns to garbage. I mean, look, Jack Eichel basically has an injury right now, and we don't know if he really has the injury. We don't know what's going on with that. We don't know when he's going to return. They recently fired their coach. Taylor Hall is looking like garbage now. I mean, there's nothing more to say about this team other than you guys need to figure out what the heck you're doing because there's problems. There's problems in Buffalo. You need to press the restart button again. You need new ownership. You need new everything. Lastly, we have the North. Now, the North is led by Toronto, who has 42 points. Tied with them is Edmonton, also with 42 points, obviously. Now, I have Toronto over Edmonton, as Toronto has played 2 less games than Edmonton has, and they have the same amount of points, so 2 games in hand, they get the edge. Winnipeg with 40 points, and Montreal with 37 points would be the final team in if the playoffs started today. Vancouver behind them with 35, Calgary with 33, and Ottawa with 25. I'm going to start with Ottawa. I love seeing Brady Tkachuk's team struggle. This is a young team, though, full of talent. The goaltending is a real question mark. No idea what's going on with their goaltending situation. I don't know what's going on with that, but they have a lot to prove, and they're starting to score more, but the problem is, you can develop some goal scorers, but if your defense and your goaltending isn't there, what are you going to do? And my other question is, how long is Matt Murray going to be out for? We're going to jump back up to the top now. I just want to get Ottawa out of the way. Toronto, this is your year, Toronto. You need to prove it this year. You need to prove it. You have no excuse. This is your year, Toronto. You have to prove it 100%. You have to show that this is your year. There's so much invested in this team. You need to prove it. Now, fortunately, the goaltending and the goaltending is just not there. But the offense and the defense are there. So, the goaltending, Frederik Andersen's currently dealing with an injury, a lower body injury. He hasn't looked good recently. They do have a very solid backup, and I'm blanking out his name. I apologize. But He's a very good player. I would be very excited about him if he was my starting goaltender right now with how he's been playing. I think he had he faced 70 consecutive shots or something like that, 72 consecutive shots without allowing a goal. Jack Campbell. And Campbell's looked very good of late. So Toronto, keep hoping. He might be your answer right now, but don't be shocked if they end up trading for another goaltender too. Edmonton's pretty good right now. Obviously, they have some talent. McDavid, Draisaitl, Darnell Nurse has looked very good. He's probably the Norris frontrunner, I believe, at this point in time. So, I mean, Edmonton has a real chance to make a run this year. Will they beat Toronto? That's the big question. Can the McDavid and Draisaitl carry their team over Toronto? It's going to be an offensive battle between those two. Winnipeg is surprising me. I'm really, when I was writing the standings, I didn't realize Winnipeg was in third place in the Canadian division. I got to respect that. Winnipeg's just one of those teams that there's not a lot to know. There's not a lot to remember. They're just kind of there. I always forget about Winnipeg. If I'm trying to list, the 31 NHL teams, Winnipeg's one of the ones I always forget. Just because they're so irrelevant. Especially, remember, I live in Connecticut, so no one talks about the Winnipeg Jets over here. It's just, I don't know what to say. Winnipeg, you're doing something right. Keep it up. I have not watched the Winnipeg Jets game this year. So, Montreal, right now, Les Canadiens are dealing with that certain viral illness. So that hurts them. They're on a little bit of a pause right now. They have been sliding lately. They did recently fire Claude Julien. So we'll have to see what happens with Montreal when they come back. So they do have some key players who are currently on a restricted list where they can't play, including Tyler Toffoli. So we'll have to see what happens with that. Montreal, they need to figure out what's going on, or they're going to lose their playoff spot to Vancouver. Now, you might be saying, wait a second, Vancouver, they're not that good. Maybe, but Thatcher Demko's playing out of his mind right now in that for that team. Well, he was recently. He did have a little bit of a tough game a couple days ago. But really, Vancouver, this is a young, talented team with some crafty veterans. I do like Vancouver, and I would not want to face that team in the playoffs. Lastly, we have Calgary. Calgary is about a 500 ball club. This is where I expected them to be. Calgary, you guys have some good players. Of course, you have Johnny Hockey. But other than that, Noah Hanifan's playing decently too. But other than them, I mean, you have a lot to prove still. So that is where we sit for the NHL standings as of right now. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll be putting another one up in about a month. Have a good rest of your day.